So we've driven south and a little bit to the east of the last stop. And if you look down beneath us, about 800 feet beneath us, maybe a little more, that's the city of Jacksonville, Alabama. Some of those larger buildings, that's Jacksonville State University. You can also look down. In some places you'll see some of the trees have been taken out. That was a tornado that tracked across the mountain several years ago. And then Highway 21 is running right down through the valley towards the northeast. But if you look across this whole valley, you can see a lot of the structures associated with the Alabama Valley and Ridge. So in the very far distance back there, those are the ridges that contain the Pennsylvanian and older Paleozoic stratigraphy. So our first stop at Choccolocco Falls is back on that larger ridge right there. If you track that down, you'll see this small little bump right there. That's a location called Chandler Mountain. It's a large syncline that has Pennsylvanian and Mississippian rocks exposed. All those rocks are, again, Pennsylvanian and then deformed by several thrust faults cut these sequences, and then they're also folded. So the traditional interpretation that all of that deformation has to post-date deposition of the Pennsylvanian rocks. Okay. So as we start coming this way, you'll see another ridge right here. It's kind of a broken but continuous ridge that runs from left to right. It's kind of the closest distinct ridge that you can see. That's Colvin Mountain. That's where the Ordovician rocks are located. And that's where we stopped right back over there. You come on the backside of those rocks, we do not see those Pennsylvanian sequences. We see the sequence beneath it. The Pennsylvanian Pottsville's missing. All right, and so as we keep coming this way, those rocks are thrust above a continuous sequence of Paleozoic on the far side in the footwall. And as you keep coming back this way, you're going to see another little set of ridges a lot closer. Once you get there, that's called the Pell City Fault. And when we get into the hanging wall of the Pell City Fault, we do not see Mississippian or Pennsylvanian rocks again. So all of these rocks back in here are Cambrian and Ordovician exclusively. All right, so as we keep coming this way, at the base of this hill is another fault, the Jacksonville Thrust Fault. We're in the hanging wall, it extends beneath our feet, and we're standing on a ridge of entirely Cambrian clastic stratigraphy. Well, with some carbonates behind us, but right in here, this entire ridge is mostly quartzites with some really low-grade metamorphic, call them kind of slate, shaly slates. They're just getting into that kind of low-grade metamorphic realm. All right, and this here, these rocks, all Cambrian, and the interpretation has always been that all these rocks are deformed in the Alleghanian orogeny, so Pennsylvanian, Permian. But if you start thinking about it, we really don't have any of the stratigraphic control to require that. There are no Pennsylvanian rocks here. There are no Mississippian rocks in these thrust sheets. So one question has always been, what is the age of deformation? Well, samples from this ridge up and down of the rocks here are the Chilhowie group. Samples were taken. We were able to extract the mineral zircon for uranium, thorium, helium cooling ages. And then we were able to process thermal models. And the thermal models from many of these ridges, you can actually see ridges further down that are more Chilhowie, indicate that cooling of these rocks may have began as early as 350 plus or minus a little bit and continued well into the Pennsylvanian. So the cooling of these rocks predates the Alleghanian significantly. So these rocks were undergoing significant cooling well before those rocks were even deformed or deposited. And so here we sit and starting to try to piece together the time scale of how do you juxtapose all these rocks, deposit rocks over there, all in this time scale of these kind of three rigid origins that we generally think about. And ultimately, it doesn't kind of work that neat and easy. So we have to be uplifting these rocks at the same time that we're depositing sediment in those far ridges down there. So one question is, can the sediment from these ridges, these Cambrian ridges, account for the sediment being shed into the basin? Not necessarily is it the source, but could it be? And when we look at the uranium-lead signatures of the zircon populations in the Chilhowie rocks, we find that they're very similar to the Precambrian signatures that show up in the Pennsylvanian rocks in those thrust sheets in the distance. Now, these thrust sheets here entirely lack any Paleozoic zircon, and there are Paleozoic zircon in those thrust sheets in the Pennsylvanian rocks. So we can partially account for it, but we cannot account for the Paleozoic rocks in the distance. So trying to piece all that together, it does give us a model that you can uplift these thrust sheets here, erode and transport sediment into that basin out there with another source of Paleozoic zircon, and then shorten the entire thing and give us that secondary pulse of deformation. Now, another part is if that's the case, then these rocks have to be deformed twice. They have to be thrust fault in the early Mississippian or even before that, and then they're potentially deformed again in the Pennsylvanian or Permian Alleghanian orogeny. And do we have evidence for that? Well, we actually do, and here's where that evidence is. So out where that Pell City Fault cuts down in the distance, in several locations we see the Pell City Fault come back up, meaning the Pell City Fault is folded. And our next stop, we're going to go back to another ridge where these rocks are replicated. And in that location, the thrust fault that bounds the rocks beneath the mountains, called Duggar Mountain, that thrust fault comes back to the surface. So another set of this stratigraphy that's replicated by a thrust fault is folded behind us. So from the Pell City Fault onward, we see folded faults, which is compatible with this two phases of deformation where you have thrust faulting and then at a later time you fold those faults.
The same thing.
True. All right, now here's the most critical piece of information of the whole trip. If you come here, there are two outcrop exposures here near overlook. So you can park at the overlook, walk down, look at the rocks, and then when you're done, use a low gear going down. It's pretty steep. And then two, there are several great lunch locations down in Jacksonville, Alabama. So we'll start with one, Jefferson's. It's a chicken wing establishment, highly recommended. There's also two little drive-in, kind of old school food places. One's called Cecil's. Barbecue, there's a place called The Rocket. There's further down the road, you'll enter Anniston. There's a place called Top of the River. It's got catfish. What are we missing? Also in Anniston, there's a place called Mata's Pizza. And I think that's all the good, no, that's not all the good food. That's just the better, that's just the top tier, top shelf. Are there any other ones? Yeah, that's the good food, I think.